And we are live in the Gio and Joey show. It's been a while, I think, since we've done a show just the two of us. We can make it if we try. Joey, how you doing?
Doing better than I deserve.
Amen, brother. So, I like this conversation we're going to have. And some of the videos you send me that we are going to put are disturbing. And yet, people are going to vote for these individuals, or at least the parties they represent. Give the audience a little bit about what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, so on the Joe and Joey show, like when we got into this, the main thing is we want to stand up for liberty of conscience, particularly religious freedom. And I thought it would be well. I saw a video, and we're going to play it. That'll be the third video we play, but by David French. David French is a guy I like him. I think he's a good guy. He's a religious liberty lawyer. He's argued religious liberty cases, free speech cases, good stuff, right? I listen to his podcast, Advisory Opinions, where he breaks down legal decisions and Supreme Court decisions. Good information. He's a I would call him like a libertarianish conservative. Good
Hmm.
guy. But he released a video for the Holy Post podcast where basically he made light of the idea that there's any kind of religious persecution in America. Now, I agreed with what he said in that in America we are still the freest Christians of anywhere in the world, but I
Hmm.
think be whistling past the graveyard to say that there's not concerning trends in the culture. So we'll talk about that. But before that, I had to share. We're going to share two clips from to show the state of the modern Democratic Party in terms of liberty.
And about your example about whistling through the cemetery, I haven't heard that one in years. But to put it in practical, imagine if you have a house in the forest, like I do, 2 acres, and nobody's infringing on my property. But if they start building, Costco's and Walmarts and things I don't want right up to the edge line, no, they're not technically infringing on my beauty of living in the forest. But you could see that it's coming, just like we've spoke about how not us per se in this show, but we spoke about how, first they wanted just tolerance and now they're demanding rights, right? The LGBTQ community. You can see it in the horizon, and we have to sound the alarm before the enemies are at your doorstep. All right, you want to watch the first video? All right. Hold on, Knucklehead. You're on.
Yeah, sorry. So the first we're going to play two clips here, and one of these people almost became president in 2004, and the other one almost became president in 2016. I think after we play these videos, we'll be very glad that neither of them became president.
All right, here we go. Here's the first one.
There's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change.
I think that's the gist of it. I mean, I think the guy is sick, but I'll let you have the first word.
Yeah, so obviously it said there in the thing that the former ambassador John Kerry for the Obama administration, he's the current climate envoy for the Biden administration, and like I said before, he's the 2004 Democratic nominee for president.
Out of
Um,
curiosity, what's his profession of faith? I think I
I
know
do
the
not,
answer, but
I don't actually know what his profession of
okay,
faith
I'm gonna
is.
look it up. All right,
If I
before I
had to
make a
guess,
fool of myself.
yeah, but
Yeah.
the biggest thing that struck me from this clip, right, is actually I'm gonna look up the quote as well. But basically, his tyranny that he's asking for, it's not like, some outright like, hey, we're gonna ban these undesirable group of people or whatever. No, it's we've got to have these regulations for the greater good, right? This if we are able to just quell streets, it'll help us, get to our climate change initiatives, or it'll help us in the next pandemic to get
Hmm.
compliance, right? Ban people. So it's about appealing to the common good, but in appealing to the common good, it's depriving people of liberty.
My
Um,
question always is, who decides what's misinformation, right? That's always the question. Who decides? This is why freedom of religion and freedom of speech is so important, because your enemies are always going to decide that your views, your opinions are the misinformation. Well, the truth is never in the majority. And so if the majority is ruling and they label you as misinformation, then how we ever going to find a revolution, or or have truth win out by persuasion if they're shutting you down and labeling you as misinformation? And coming from a person who was, like you said, a presidential candidate, a person who is in government, who has a platform and a voice, what about if we shut him down for his COVID misinformation? Would he want that? Of course not. And I wouldn't want that, right? Because what we do here on the Gio and Joey show is protect speech, protect liberty of conscience. Even if I don't agree with you, like for example, today there was the raising of a Palestinian flag in Chicago. And depending on the angle, there's, why are we raising a Palestinian flag in the United States on October 7th of all days, right? But they have the right to do it because I think it was a private group and on private property. Um, so it's nuts. Even though I don't like it, we have to protect it. But these fools would shut anybody they don't agree with down, and that's dangerous for everybody.
yeah, so there's a lot of talk about the danger of, say, Trump, or the danger of populism, or the
Mm,
danger of Christian nationalism. And these things do have a danger. But I think people, to bring back that phrase, whistling past the graveyard of the fact that progressives, right? Like, in other words, they talk a good game about standing up for the Constitution when it's like, oh, January 6th that they're
hmm.
objecting to. But what people forget is the progressive movement, at least since Woodrow Wilson, has been anti-constitutional, has had this idea that we see John Kerry illustrate, where it's basically advocating for a rule by elites, or rule by an enlightened few, right? And it's this idea they think if this enlightened few, these expert class, they know how to run our lives better than we do, and so we just got to give them that authority.
Yeah, I know. And if you surrender your authority to somebody else, you're a fool, right? You should always think for yourself. The Bible talks about in a multitude of counsel there is wisdom, but you should never abdicate your liberty of conscience. And that's the problem because too many people are following talking heads and not thinking for themselves. Let's show that next clip of your favorite Democratic presidential candidate.
If the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real harm.
Y'all, FEMA is at it again. Listen to
Right? So you see what I don't want people to miss is that she talks about if we lose total control. Well, maybe you should. I'm glad you lost, right? Because who's the we she's talking about, right? The liberal woke elite that would shut down and arrest people. Well, I don't want to say arrest, but would shut down places like X or Twitter, right? places where free speech. By the way, I saw an article that somebody shared with me how Twitter is the number one source for news, like legit news, right? It's the most unbiased and the number one source for free speech of the social platforms. They will shut that down, right? Because for them, anything they don't agree with is misinformation and should be shut down. And that should scare people. And yet people are going to vote for this machine that would shut down their thoughts if they should ever wake up and have a free thought.
Yeah, and the thing I'll say, there's truth in what Hillary's saying, and the fact that there is misinformation on social media. There is Russian bots on social media, right? When you have freedom, there's going to be dangers associated with that. But generally speaking, in America, we've recognized that freedom is worth the danger, right? What we should do to, rather than crack down on liberty and freedom of speech, we should work on educating the populace, work on persuading them, making sure our education system's better so people aren't as susceptible to conspiracy theories or misinformation. But the answer is not to shut it down. I did look up this quote here by C.S. Lewis, where he said, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons."
Christian Baker Jack.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so good. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent, moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. Those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. And I think that's exactly the type of tyranny that we're seeing here from these, leftist establishment types.
From what, where did Lewis write that? Because there is an article from him or essay from him called The Humanist View of Punishment that has the same sentiment, right? When when we punish somebody, whether they are quote unquote rehabilitated or not, if their penalty was 10 years, then they get out, whether they still believe the way they believe. We're not here to rehabilitate anybody. If they commit another crime, then they go back to jail. But these humanists, or in that article, similar to this quote, they would hold you under their oppression until you believe like they do. This is like 1984 all over again, where 2 + 2 = 5, and they finally break the character, the hero of the story, and make them believe that 2 + 2 = 5. And it's tyranny. That's what it is. And more people would rather, I think, if people truly understood, you'd rather be physically in prison than mentally in prison. And that's where what they're trying to do. You sent me this Christian Baker clip. You ready to go?
Yeah, well, first we're going to do the David French one.
That didn't come in.
Oh, it didn't? Oh, I think
No.
it wasn't in that thing, but it was the next text. The because that kind of sets the stage. We're going to answer his question.
Okay.
But
The Jack.
the source for everybody was for the C.S. Lewis quote was God in the
Hmm.
Dock.
Okay, yeah. So which is the link you wanted me to do? Because I did the John Kerry, the Clinton, and then the David
The Holy
French clip.
Post,
Which one?
the Holy Post one.
Oh, okay, got you. All right. Let me set it up.
In the United States of America? Are Christians really persecuted? Are Christians really persecuted in the United States of America? Is religious liberty truly under threat? The answer might surprise you. Millions of my fellow evangelicals believe we are persecuted, or they believe we're one election away from a crackdown. They feel like their religious liberty is slipping away. This sense of dread and despair is inflaming the culture wars and causing good people to feel unnecessary fear. But there's good news. By any reasonable definition, American Christians are not persecuted. and the legal protections for religious liberty are stronger than at any time in American history. People of all faiths or no faith at all enjoy an immense amount of protection from government interference. That doesn't mean there aren't challenges or injustices, but it remains the case that the American Christian community is arguably the freest Christian community in the world.
Can we trust you? Yes.
Okay, I don't know what point he's trying to make, and I guess he'll bring it up, but you can see it in the horizon. Like my analogy that I used earlier about living in the forest and having the beauty disturbed by people coming up right to the edges of my property. Yes, we're free here in America. Yes, I can still go to my church and do and preach and teach whatever I want. But can I see the writing on the wall? Well, yes. Can I see that the truths of Revelation 13 and 14, where worship will be enforced, and that is a threat to religious liberty? Yeah, I could see it in the horizon. It may be far off, and just because you don't know what you're looking for doesn't mean it's not happening.
Yeah, and I do think so. The important truth, something that I think we should be grateful for and thankful for,
Mm.
that David brings up is that from a legal standpoint, we do still have a lot of freedom, right?
Yes.
And generally speaking, on religious liberty cases, when they do come before, say, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of religious liberty.
Hmm.
But I don't think that tells the whole story. So that's good news in the sense that there's recourse, right, for religious liberty
Hmm.
discrimination at this point. But what does that say for the people, for the culture of religious liberty, if in order to be vindicated on religious liberty grounds, it takes years and years of trials and in court to finally get your day before the Supreme Court, right? Think of, well, the first guy we're going to look at who his life for years has been hounded by LGBT activists because of his refusal to go along with their agenda. So yes, it's good that the court and the legal system comes down in favor of religious liberty,
Hmm.
but I think it would be better if we had a culture of mutual respect for both religious Americans and secular Americans, right? Where it wasn't this tit for tat, right, going after religious Americans.
Yeah, and I like that point that you make because um, if I have to, you may say I have religious liberty, right? But if I have to spend my whole life savings defending it, and even if I get vindicated later, what's the point, right? If I've been fighting it, I'd be grateful for it, but it shouldn't come down to the point where I have to fight for rights that are ingrained in our Constitution. And so we'll go to that video of the next guy you talk about who has been under this dilemma.
Christian baker Jack Phillips is once again facing judgment from the Colorado Supreme Court. The case is over his refusal to make a gender transition cake, which his attorney argues is protected by freedom of speech and religion.
Phillips serves all people. He just can't express every message.
Plaintiff Autumn Scardina's attorney John McHugh argues there was no message. Scardina requested a pink cake with blue icing, but no writing or image to celebrate a transition from male to female. Lower courts ruled Phillips refused to serve Scardina based on his customer's identity, constituting discrimination.
Mr. Phillips is being asked nothing more than to do what he has repeatedly said he will do for other customers, which is specifically make a pink cake with blue icing. The testimony and the finding was he would gladly make that cake for other customers.
Outside the courthouse, Phillips said even without writing or a design, a gender transition cake sends a message.
Whether we create a custom cake always depends on what the message the cake will express is, never on who requests it. This means that I will not create a custom cake expressing any message that violates my religious beliefs, regardless of who asked for it.
It may be months before the Colorado Supreme Court issues its opinion. If it's in Phillips' favor, the case will be over. If it's against him, Phillips and his Alliance Defending Freedom attorney intend to take the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, where they've been before arguing a similar case. In 2019, the High Court ruled in Phillips' favor by saying the state of Colorado acted with clear and impermissible hostility toward his religious beliefs when he refused to create a custom cake for a same-sex wedding.
Over the last 10 years, Colorado officials and activists have tried to punish me for my religious beliefs. They have even tried to change my beliefs.
In 2023, the Supreme Court also ruled in favor of another Colorado Christian artist charged by the state. Lori Smith, a graphic designer who refused to create wedding websites for same-sex couples, was on hand Tuesday offering support.
Like Jack, I have received several death threats, continued harassment. The cost has been both professional and personal.
Both Smith and Phillips say they routinely serve people who identify as LGBT, but draw the line when asked to create something that violates their conscience. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thank you, Lori. Gordon, back over to you.
Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, so the first Jack Phillip case. So and I don't want to get this wrong. I believe it was 2014 when Obergefell came down, the decision from the Supreme Court legalizing gay marriage, and it was shortly after that that Jack Phillips wound up in court because of these. And by the way, it was these gay activists who had come. They signaled out his shop because he was a Christian, right? And then they asked him to make this gay wedding cake. He wanted to do it. And then, it was 2019 before he got vindicated in the Supreme Court from that. So from like 2014, 2015 area to 2019 before he gets vindicated in the Supreme Court for that one. Then after that happens, some transgender activists come and now he's back in court. Although I think this video is older, if I'm correct. I do think he was vindicated again by the Supreme Court. But you know what I mean? That's years of his life fighting for his right not to express and to use his speech in a manner that he doesn't agree with. So yes, it's good that the Supreme Court and the law ultimately sided with him, but that's not the kind of culture of religious liberty that we want to have in America.
Yeah, and going back to the thing, one, you said something interesting. They are intentionally looking for him, right? Look, if I go to a place where I'm not wanted and I'm told the first time I'm not wanted there, I want to live in peace. I just don't go back. There are other bakeries around there. There's no doubt about that. But they're wanting to make an example of him, just like Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make an example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to the point where he was willing to throw him in a fiery furnace. And these people can't throw him in a fiery furnace, but they want to tie him up in litigation till it becomes impossible. Luckily for him, he has this alliance defending him, but we shouldn't live in a society. Whatever happened to live and let live when it isn't violating, um, the life of an innocent person, like abortion, right? Because every time you bring up live and let live, then they bring up, but you guys want to regulate abortion. Well, that's because that's innocent life, and so you can see the spirit they operate in. They don't want to be left alone. They don't want to just live their lives. They want to dictate their beliefs to upon society and upon this baker. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. Like at the end of the day, right, we live in a pluralistic democracy. There's a lot of people with a lot of different views and lifestyles in this country. And the only way that we can have peace and that we can have stability and we can have a depolarization is if we agree that we're going to allow particularly adults, right, to, live um, live peacefully with people who disagree with them, right? That means leaving Christian institutions to be Christian institutions, leaving Christian individuals and families to live their lives and order their families as they see fit according to biblical principles. That means leaving Jewish families free to do that as well, and Muslim families and the like. But what we have here is, right, you have a progressive agenda that isn't happy with live and let live. Because, listen, I believe as a Christian that marriage is between a man and a woman. Guess what? I don't go around to like gay adults and like, hey, you need to, it's Sodom.
Yeah.
Like Sodom. Like, no, I don't do that. Like,
Mhm.
you live your life, or you want to live your life, and you're made in the image of God, and you have free will. Now, when you start enforcing stuff on kids in schools, right, that's a different story. But if you're living your life and you're not involving me, I'm not going to come after you. But we don't see that same courtesy from the other side often. Now, I will say this, right? The activist crazies, they're a minority of any
Hmm.
community.
But
But
they're the loudest.
that minority needs to be more thoroughly rejected by the majority if we're going to be able to come to any kind of depolarized state.
There was something I bookmarked here that I had seen years ago, but it's going around again on social media, and it says it's a conversation between a secular person and a Christian. Secular person says, I want to do X. The Christian says, you're free to do it. Secular person says, but you think X is wrong. Yes. Secular person, because you want to control me. Christian, no, you're free to do whatever you wish. Secular person, but you think X is wrong. Yes, but only because I want what's best for you. Secular person, but I want to do X. You're free to do it. Secular person, but I want you to say that X is good. I can't say that, says the Christian. Secular person, then why are you such a hateful, intolerant bigot? And that's really what's happening in society today, right? I don't have to agree with your lifestyle. I don't have to agree with your decisions. And I'm free to tell you that if you ask me my opinion, that they're wrong. Or in a public forum, I'm free to express that X type behavior is wrong. But in a free country, you're free to do a lot of things that I disagree with. But they don't want tolerance anymore. What they want is for me to endorse their behavior. And I can't do that based on my liberty of conscience. The next video is she came into prominence years ago. She's back in the news again, I guess.
No, I just wanted to highlight a story where it didn't actually end as well for religious liberty. But it's a
Okay.
little bit more complicated, but
Okay.
we'll see.
It's been a little more than 8 years since David Ermold and David Moore first tried to get a marriage license at the Rowan County Courthouse. It was July 2015, days after the Supreme Court had decided the same-sex marriage case.
They did not want to be, but they became internet famous almost instantly when their YouTube video went viral.
Then Rowan County Clerk Kim Davis refused the license, saying granting it would be a violation of her religious rights, and she refused to issue marriage licenses to all couples. As the situation gained national attention, a judge ordered Davis to grant licenses, and she spent 5 days in jail after refusing that order. Ultimately, her deputy clerks began issuing licenses. In March 2022, a federal judge ruled Davis violated Ermold and Moore's civil rights. Today, a jury decided the damages.
We eventually got our day in court, which was today and earlier this week. And that's the award that the jury gave us, $50,000 for each.
$100,000 in all. Their attorneys, Joe Buckles and Michael Gartland, expect they'll also be awarded around $200,000 in attorney fees.
Made himself vindicated. I felt like today was the day of vindication, and I felt so happy for him. It sends the message: government officials that violate clearly established constitutional rights should be sued and should be held accountable.
However, this is not the end of the road. Davis's attorneys with Liberty Counsel say they plan to appeal. In a statement on their website, they say, quote, Davis is not liable for any damages because she was entitled to a religious accommodation from issuing marriage licenses under her name and authority that conflict with her religious beliefs, end quote. They also said, quote, moreover, the plaintiffs suffered no damages because they could have obtained marriage licenses from any nearby clerk's office. The plaintiffs instead created a shame case by intentionally targeting Kim Davis because of her religious beliefs, end quote. In fact, Liberty Counsel said they intend to see the case go all the way to the Supreme Court, where it seems they hope to challenge the same-sex marriage decision itself. The statement says, quote, this case has the potential to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, where Kim Davis will argue for religious freedom and also argue that Obergefell should be overturned. 3 of the 5 justices in the Obergefell majority are no longer on the court, end quote. For now, Ermold and Moore's attorneys are taking this one courtroom at a time.
Then they'll have 30 days to appeal. We'll go to the Sixth Circuit for the last time in this case. They'll petition the Supreme Court, and I pray the court rejects to hear this case.
In Lexington, Sean Moody, LAX 18 News.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
So do you think it goes all the way up, or has there been an update on this case?
I don't know the exact details about the ending of this case. But what I would state is the timing of social change on this issue. Obviously, today, like for particularly younger people, right? Like when you look at the state of, say, LGBTQ acceptance or the acceptance of gay marriage or whatever, like you would think that this is some long established norm. But that's not the case, right? In 2007, I believe it was, when it was put to a vote at the state level in California, the state of California, the citizens of the state of California rejected a gay marriage proposal. Right before, again, it was kind of moving in that way in the various state levels before the Supreme Court nationalized it, but it very much was a live political issue, and the Supreme Court kind of took it out of the democratic process. But the crazy thing is, right, so this happens, and this shift happens in law, and then all of a sudden, all these government employees and stuff, people like Kim Davis, who are, in their positions, now all of a sudden the next day they're required, right, because now they're government employees. The law now says the opposite of what it used to say about marriage, and now they're required to just get along and go along with it, right? And it was very much a, we want to make an example of this bigoted, county clerk person. And that's the other thing, right? Like social change, right? Like that whiplash, right? It wasn't about, hey, how do we reconcile these two views? How do we make sure that everybody's liberty is protected? No, instead it was, again, that attitude of the LGBT versus the Christians, whatever. Now, I do believe Kentucky, after the Kim Davis case, like I said, she spent 5 days in jail for this.
Hmm.
That they just made it so county clerks didn't have to sign marriage licenses, and so that kind of, for the future, it made it not
Yes.
a nullity. But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, what we have to, something the video said, it said that any government agency, well, government agencies aren't made up of nothing. They're made up of citizens of the United States, and religious liberty and Second Amendment and freedom of speech laws still apply to government officials. Just because they work for the government doesn't mean they leave their constitutional rights at the door, right? And so we have to defend people like her. I'm glad they have this workaround. That's an accommodation, right? But no, they want to, like you said, make an example out of her, and that's not fine. Just because you work for the government does not mean you leave your constitutional rights at the door. The government itself can't pass laws, but you can still hold to your religious principles. And I'm not participating in anything that violates my Christian, even if I have to. And doesn't mean I have to leave my job as well either, right? There are protections. It's not just suffer the consequences. No, I need to be protected as well.
yeah, no, I agree with that.
All
And
right,
like I
this.
said, the First Amendment, and this is what people get wrong.
Mm,
The First Amendment, America is not France. France has a separation of church and state in France means, right, where they have something called enforced secularism. I forget what the word is.
yeah.
It's like that's why they just passed that law
Oh,
recently,
the burkas,
barring
right?
Muslim women from wearing the burqa in public,
Hmm.
right? America doesn't do that, right? In other words, we have a separation of church and state when it comes to control, right? And we very much support that. But guess what? Religious people in government are still allowed to be religious in
Hmm.
government. Just they're not allowed to, give that power and authority to the church and enforce religious dogma on people who don't believe.
Right, this next, it's not a video, but it's a article. Why'd we bring this up today?
Yeah. So this was another one. Let me go to the notes here. Yeah, so you see here, the Supreme Court adoption case could have national impact on religious liberty. Like I said, I am. What was the date on that? October.
October 28,
Yeah, that was an
2020.
older one. Generally speaking, the Supreme Court has been good, but here's the thing: over the years since gay marriage was legalized, many Catholic and Christian adoption agencies have just shut down because a lot of them don't have the money to fight it, and they're not gonna,
Hmm.
Catholic, or just generically Christian adoption agencies doesn't want to adopt children into homes that they don't believe is in the best interest of the child, right? Because as Christians, and I actually think scientifically, we
Yes, it
know that the
is.
best situation for a child is to have a mother and a father. Like, obviously, there are tragic situations where
Hmm.
things happen, but you should still try to put it into as close
No,
of
but
that.
but even if there are tragic situations, right? Let's say, heaven forbid, something happens to me or something happens to my wife. That still doesn't negate that it's going to be tougher and the kids are going to be worse off, even if, my wife is a solid Christian woman. The kids are still going to be worse off not having a father, or vice versa, not having a mother. So then when you want to then throw, man, man, and woman, woman, two are not better than one. The science has proven it. It has to be a mother and a father. And should something happen to the father or the mother, you know, you would hope that there'd be, a stepping up, and the one parent can do as good as job as two parents. It's not. It's not. Something's going to suffer, but by the grace of God, it doesn't have to be loss of eternal life or anything like that. But there's always going to be a void, and that's why happy homes, happy marriages, living to old age where they can see their grandkids is good for society as a whole, man and woman together. So death do us part.
Yeah, and on this, we don't have a specific link or video for this one,
Hmm.
but it's on the same topic, right? When it comes to the fact that, yes, this is something that's being fought out in the legal courts about what adoption agencies and foster care networks are going to do about religious liberty. But we've already seen. So in our denomination, there's a Seventh-day Adventist couple, an older couple, they were grandparents out in Washington State, and they wanted to, I forget what the exact arrangement was, but foster custody of some kind of their grandchild. Now, their grandchildren were very young, and there was no LGBTQ inclinations or anything like that. But the question was asked them in the um, whatever the interview process was for them getting custody. They were asked, "Would you affirm your child's sexuality or gender identity?" And this couple is like, well, we're religious conservative Christians. We believe in a biblical sexual ethic, and so that's how we would raise our grandkid. And they did not get custody of their kids because the state of Washington said that they were not a safe home. So, like I said, David French says, legally, we do have a lot of freedom, and that's true. But like, what do you say to these grandparents who lost custody of their grandkids because of their Christian beliefs and their biblical beliefs? And that's happened to there's been many other parents and grandparents who have lost custody. I think of the father, I believe, in Texas, who
Hmm.
lost custody of his kid, his son, to his ex-wife, who decided she wanted to raise a little girl, and so he's now not allowed to. And we have I have a friend on social media. The same thing happened to his kid. Um, so these things happen, and that's a violation of parental rights, and it's a violation of religious liberty as well of parents. So, like, these are things that are concerning and that are happening that I think we need to raise the awareness on.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, there have been times I've considered moving to California, but every time they pass one of these laws that gives you less and less parental rights, and with three little girls, I say no, thank you. On top of the fact that California is beautiful, but on top of the fact these these laws that don't support parents, and then the high taxes and everything else, and the rampant crime that's going up, I'll pass. We have a lot of links here. I don't think we're going to get to all of them because I have a deadline I
Some of
have to get
them are
to.
a little here.
Yeah. No, no, no. But I want to do them because they look interesting. But I do want to go to some of the COVID shot mandate consciences. You want to
Yeah,
jump to the
let's just do one of the Catholic ones then. Let's do the number 7.
number 7? Okay. All right. Ready? Here we go. Let's put it on. Let me.
And then we'll jump to the COVID stuff.
Okay. So tell me about this one.
Yeah. So this is something that's happened under the Biden administration. And this is something, so give a little background. Obviously, but for the audience, right?
Yeah.
Seventh Adventists, we're very much, and our church is very much focused on religious liberty. We have a religious liberty department, does a lot
Hmm.
of great work, right? We've have actually in talks maybe to have a religious liberty lawyer from our church come on, talk about arguing a case in front of the Supreme Court. And we argue cases as Adventists, we stand up for the religious liberty rights of all Americans. But something that I've noticed where it's sometimes can be a little bit of a, a blind spot for our religious liberty people, and this can, I think, extend to other Protestants as well, is religious liberty truly, like, it doesn't have anything to do about theological agreement.
Hmm.
And religious liberty, and that'll kind of get into the COVID thing as well, because this was the other blind spot with
Hmm.
some of our liberty experts. But religious liberty, okay, so this was back in the Obama administration. The Little Sisters of the Poor, that's one of the links we're not going to bring up. But the Little
Hmm.
Sisters of the Poor is a group of nuns. And the Obama administration came after them because, as part of Obamacare, they had a mandate that they had to fund birth control and I think even abortive healthcare to their employees. And the Little Sisters of the Poor, this is a Catholic organization. These are nuns, right? They do charitable work, all sorts of great stuff. Obviously, I don't agree with them theologically on a lot of things, but there was an article in our religious liberty paper that basically said, this is a business issue, right? And that they need to go along. And I'm like, what? No, no, they don't. This is their sincerely held religious belief, and the government does not have a right to enforce them. And so this other issue, it also involves Catholics, and it happened under the Biden administration. And I think as Protestants, I think as Adventists, I think as Christians generally, and as civil libertarians and people who care about religious liberty, we should care about this issue. And we don't have to be conservative Catholics or Latin Mass devotees to stand up for it. So we'll just play this, and then we'll jump into the COVID stuff.
All right, let's go.
When a story broke earlier this year that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been targeting some Catholics, the Bureau cast it aside as the work of a single rogue field office. FBI Director Christopher Wray then confirmed this during testimony to the House Judiciary Committee in July.
What's the difference between a traditional Catholic and a radical traditional Catholic?
I'm not an expert on the Catholic orders.
Well, your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you can define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
The problem is, according to a less redacted internal FBI document just released by the House Judiciary Committee, the effort was much more widespread than a single field office.
When we finish our internal review, which will be very soon, we will come back
idea how
before
many
the committee
Catholics in America?
and provide a briefing on what we found.
Well, we appreciate the briefing. We want to talk to the people who wrote it. Any idea how many Catholics there are in America, Director?
No, sir.
There's a lot, over 60 million. What percentage of those are radical traditional Catholics, according to the Richmond Field Office of the FBI?
Again, that product is not something that I will defend or excuse. It's something that I thought was appalling and removed it.
It was back in February that a whistleblower leaked a heavily redacted January report from the FBI's Richmond office. Its title, which sounds more like a statement, "Interest of racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists in radical traditionalist Catholic ideology almost certainly presents new mitigation opportunities."
That product did not, to as best as we can tell, result in any investigative action as a result of it. None.
The document in question defined radical traditionalist Catholics as those who attend the Latin Mass and those who frequently adhere to anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ, and white supremacist ideology. Worse still, the agents relied on half-baked open-source reporting from liberal outfits to justify further FBI investigation.
Why would they even think about doing this? You know what the motivation was?
Well, again, I think that's what our internal review will find, and I'd rather wait until I hear what the results of that internal
Well, I don't need an
review are.
internal review. I can read the document. I assume you can do the same, because it says right there on the same page. Richmond assesses extremist interest in radical traditional Catholics is likely to increase over the next 12 to 24 months in the run-up to the next general election.
On July 25th, the FBI finally provided the committee with a less redacted version of the report. And surprise, surprise, it turns out this was a much wider Bureau effort. In a letter to Christopher Wray, Jim Jordan and Mike Johnson point to the updated document and highlight how it now appears that both FBI Portland and FBI Los Angeles field offices were involved. Of course, none of this comes as any surprise to Jim Jordan.
Same paragraph. Events in which extremists and radical traditional Catholics might have common cause include legislation, judicial decisions in such areas as abortion rights, immigration, affirmative action, and LGBTQ protections. It's politics. That's the motivation.
In his letter, Mr. Jordan asks Mr. Wray to amend his July testimony, to fully explain the nature and scope of the FBI's assessment of traditional Catholics as potential domestic terrorists. He also repeats his original request.
How soon are you going to complete this internal investigation so we can talk to these folks who put this together?
I expect us to be able to brief the committee on our internal review later this summer.
Will that briefing include the names of the individuals who put this document together attacking Americans' First Amendment liberty?
I'm not sure yet what it'll include because it's not done yet.
Mr. Wray understandably defends the FBI's integrity, but he undermines that effort when he or his deputies aren't candid about what exactly happened.
How do you know the government's lying, Joey?
Well,
They're
here's the
moving
thing.
their mouth. Because
That, and here's what
how are you going to be in charge of the FBI and not know this is going on? And then he tried to say it was one field office, and now we know there's at least two. And this is why, even though, look, I'm not a sympathizer of Catholic theology, I think it's corrupt. You can't be doing this to citizens simply because they disagree. And it goes back to that First Amendment. Just because they disagree with LGBTQ agendas and abortion and stuff. Well, guess what? As a Seventh day Adventist, I don't believe in that stuff either. Are they going to start putting a spotlight on radical Seventh day Adventists? And if we don't protect Catholics, then who's going to be there to protect Methodists and Protestants and other, Calvinists and Brethren and Mennonites and Seventh day Adventists? This kind of stuff boils my heart.
So I got the chance to go on a mission trip in 2017 to Cuba. Cuba had recently been opened because the Obama administration had lifted the embargo that was on for 50 years. And when I was there, first of all, the people of Cuba, amazing. The food's great. The women are pretty, right? Like Cuba's great. But one thing that when we were going to the various churches that I noticed, and that the story that was told over and over, is that the people in the churches had trouble trusting each other because a common practice in Cuba is for the government to have
Infiltrate.
informants, right? Kind of keep an eye on prayer meetings and church services. So Indian did this as well in other communist countries. Um, and so the people never knew if the people sitting in a pew next to them, the fact that that's happening in some Catholic parishes, that's infuriating. It's against the spirit of the First Amendment and of American liberty. And we should all call it out, regardless of whether we're Catholics or Protestants or Jews or Muslims or atheists.
Atheists. Yeah. Hey, look, there's a book called The Devil and Karl Marx. Have you heard of it?
Is that the one by Paul Kengor?
Yep.
I haven't read it, but I know who Paul Kengor is.
Look, there's a chapter in there. Now, I'm not reading it. I'm listening to it on audiobook. I haven't even finished yet. I have 4 hours left. There's a chapter there that was so horrific. And I remember I'm listening it in the car. Luckily, I had my AirPods on while the kids are yapping in the background. My wife is in the passenger seat listening. And it was so graphic and so repugnant that I was just hoping for it to end. And mind you, I'm a mature adult who can tolerate stuff, know what I mean? But this book talks about how communist ideology has intentionally infiltrated the church to try to subvert it and to inform on it. And so people, you need a strong, mature stomach for it. But The Devil and Karl Marx by Paul Gengor it's a crazy read, and I don't doubt some of it that's going on, obviously. It's similar to this. Catholics, as I'll say once again, as much as I don't like Catholic theology, many lay Catholics are outstanding citizens and good voices for the pro-life movement and for the government. Like, what was that ex Congresswoman Tulsa that they put on a secret terrorist list?
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, man. But look, am I surprised? No. Revelation tells us that this government here is going to get very, very ugly as time goes on. Let's watch a couple of these COVID videos because I got a sharp time. I got to end in 12 minutes. Let's go. I hated the religious. I mean, not the religious.
I don't know if we had a video on the COVID. I think we were just going to talk about that.
Okay, yeah, some articles.
Well, that was in our mother country of Great Britain.
Yeah, it's funny.
For pro-life pregnancy center.
Oh, I can't watch this.
Oh, that's just how in France, right? Muslim
The
women
hijab, yeah.
have had the hijab banned. And
Let's
by the
see
way,
this last
I'm a
one.
Christian, right? I don't agree with Islam. I don't agree with forcing women to wear it. But the idea that if a woman who is a Muslim who wants to wear it, she should be allowed to wear it in public spaces. End of story. Right? I also support drivers, like exceptions being made to protect Muslim women who want to wear it while they're getting their driver's license, because guess
Hmm.
what? Liberty is it's an important enough value. It is such a core value that it's worth making the exceptions, right? I just watched with our church's youth group or young adult Bible study group, we watched the Desmond Doss, the Mel Gibson Hacksaw Ridge movie
Yeah, yeah.
about Ross, right? Guess what? The army in World War II, they didn't want to bend to his pacifism and his idea of, they said, oh, him not carrying a gun, he's going to be dead weight, he's going to be all these things. But guess what? Eventually, the Army and the United States did the right thing. And guess what? No one today will say that Desmond Doss was anything other than a hero who was willing to sacrifice and go above and beyond for his country. First,
And he didn't he get the Purple Heart?
first and only, I don't,
Non-combatant.
that could be, yeah, but first and only non-combatant to get the Congressional Medal of Honor. So guess what?
Hmm.
Our country is better when we stand for liberty of conscience, right? It may seem in the particular, it may seem like there's some, like that Lewis quote, there's some good reason to go against liberty. But in the long term, our country is a better place and our democracy functions better when we respect liberty of conscience.
Yeah, and going back to the John Kerry quote and the Clinton quote, anytime they want to talk about we have to curb misinformation because it's we're going to lose control or it's going to be worse, you have to ask yourself who then is the judge? Who's calling the shots? And there is no Republican that's going to trust, no conservative that's going to trust Kerry or Clinton, right? And you shouldn't trust anybody that wants to subvert a clear statement of the Constitution. Like he clearly called out the Constitution by clearly calling out the First Amendment. That should be, the biggest red flag to run away from that jump. And I don't know. Let me let you
Hey,
have the final word
yeah,
there.
I was just going to say, because we're running low, rather than jump to the COVID stuff, let's
Yeah.
end with the Reagan clip. You got that
Okay.
one? I
Yeah,
think
let
that's a
me get
good,
it up.
and then we'll have
Okay.
our closing.
Okay. Reagan's freedom. Okay. Oh, yes. Let me put that up. 1 second.
This is why I'm a Reagan Republican.
I'll tell you a funny, not a funny, but a Reagan made me mad story here in a bit.
Uh-oh.
In a funny way. Ready?
Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction.
Mm-hmm.
It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation, for it comes only once to a people. And those in world history who have known freedom and then lost it have never known it again.
He will try a field goal.
So, here's my Reagan story. The day he got assassinated or attempted assassination, and mind you, that was what, 81 or
Before,
83? Yeah, I know,
before,
yeah. Um, Regardless, I was watching the Adam West, Bruce Ward Batman movie. And obviously, the assassination attempt took the news and interrupted the movie. And I was thinking to myself, remember, it's 81, so I'm only 6 years old. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, the movie will come back on now. And it never came back on. And they didn't even replay it like weeks later or anything. And I was so mad at Reagan. Obviously, as I've grown older and I understood the importance of that, I have since forgiven him. But as a 6-year-old, I was annoyed. Why'd you play that clip? Obviously, it's obvious, but you have a passion for Reagan. So do I.
yeah, I just think, I think it's important, right? Because I think there's a problem on the American right now about casting a vision to like actually win people, like rather than just like grievance, but like casting a vision. And here's the thing: the American I will go to my dying, like, obviously, I believe all the stuff that you were talking about Revelation 13.
Hmm.
We'll lose liberty here eventually before Christ
Hmm.
comes. Um, but the American experiment and the constitutional liberty, right, and individual freedom, that experiment is the greatest experiment of human government ever to exist on this planet. And it's worth defending. And we don't know when liberty is going to be taken away because we don't know when Jesus is going to come.
Hmm.
And so we have to fight, right? And should, you don't want, you're a father, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't want your daughters to say, well, why didn't you speak out, right? But you
Hmm.
enjoyed, why didn't you speak out, right? Or, when I have, kids someday, right? If the Lord doesn't come soon before that, right? I don't want to look at my kids and say, hey, I didn't stand up for your freedom, right? Like we all have an obligation to defend this thing, this fragile experiment of liberty. And that means standing up for the religious liberty of, you know, Americans who think and live very different lives than you. Because at the end of the day, liberty is for all of us, right? And we're all made in the image and likeness of God and are, like our founder said, that these rights are inalienable, right?
Hmm.
Somebody doesn't get to pick and choose it. I don't care what Hillary or John Kerry say. Guess what? They don't get to pick and choose who gets to have a voice in social media or these other places because you have a natural, ingrained right to freedom of speech and to freedom of religion. And so we ought to defend it, right? And as Christians, we ought to be the loudest voices defending liberty of conscience for everybody.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It was March 30th, 1981, which means I had 5 days earlier, I had just turned 8 years old. So it was one of the news, that I remember clearly. Because I sat and watched the whole thing while I'm waiting for the Batman movie to come back on. And I understood and I was glad he survived. But I was 8 years old and glad he wasn't killed because those next years of his presidency, right? He had a two-term presidency, was good for religious liberty in Russia, right? The wall came down. He helped with that. And so we want to defend religious liberty for everyone, even for people we disagree with. But it has to be mutual. It has to go both ways. Until next time on the Geo and Joey Show, be blessed. We have a special episode next Monday. Take care.